In this lecture, I want to examine some of the consequences of the electoral system in the United States for the American political system more generally, but especially for the behavior of political parties and individual legislators. Now, the single-member district first past the post system affects how congressmen play their strategic games once they get to Washington, D.C. I want to talk about three effects that are particularly salient, although I think we could go on for quite some time in listing the repercussions of the American electoral system on the general character of the political system in which we live. The first consequence or effect is that the U.S. electoral system exacerbates collective action problems in Congress. It makes it more difficult to overcome these collective action problems. Two, the U.S. electoral system encourages pork barrel spending and earmarking. And three, the U.S. electoral system makes the parties large and moderate, or larger and more moderate than they would be in alternate systems. And this is also called Dovres Law. First, let's talk about collective action. The U.S. electoral system exacerbates collective action problems in Congress. And the reason for this is because in a single-member district, a congressperson doesn't have to worry about what the rest of the country thinks about their voting record, but only has to worry about what their district thinks about their voting record, which means that if they can get something passed which hurts the rest of the country but makes their district better off and their district voters will reward them for that, then that's exactly what they will do. Now, this makes it more difficult for parties in Congress to achieve a strong degree of coordination on votes, because what happens is that if a particular policy would harm somebody in their district, they are going to tend to not vote with their party, because at the end of the day, they are accountable not to their party, but to their district. Right? It doesn't matter what the rest of the country thinks, and it doesn't matter what the party thinks. The party, of course, needs to make sure that it's electorally viable in a large number of districts, because its interests are more identical to the national interest than to the local interest of the individual congressman. So parties find it very difficult to secure votes from their members if that vote would seriously harm them in their districts, right? So if you think about a Republican bill to cut spending, and if that Republican bill would lead to spending cuts in, let's say, on military bases, well, then you can imagine that those Republican congressmen and women who represent districts that have military bases would have a very strong electoral incentive to oppose the general Republican policy of spending cuts. And any deal made with Democrats that, traded, say, spending cuts in the military against spending cuts in Social Security or other welfare programs, that sort of deal would be very unpopular with very specific Republican districts. And so even though the deal might be good for Republicans and even the country as a whole, such a deal would likely face a lot of blowback on the part of specific Republican congressmen. And so if there's enough of these individual interests or individual district interests that are harmed, a bill that might help the country as a whole might still fail because it could not secure the votes of members who are accountable to districts who would be particularly hurt. And this is all the more true if those particular congressmen and women are appointed to key positions. Let's not forget that our committee system places certain congressmen and women in very important positions with respect to whether bills get passed or not. So, if you are representing a military district and you are, in the Senate Appropriations Committee, or you are in a committee that is in charge of passing the bill in question, then you can have a lot of influence over whether that bill passes or fails. Okay, so Local politics, in other words, have a large impact on the ability to achieve national priorities in SMD FPTP systems. In PR systems, parties don't have this complicated task of wheedling, cajoling, and otherwise bribing individual members to follow their lead. They can simply threaten to bump them off the list, and that should be good enough to get them to toe the party line. So in district voting systems, congressmen and women can exercise a certain amount of independence from the national party, which makes collective action in pursuit of diffuse national goals in particular much more difficult. A further consequence of this is pork barrel politics. Because local interests must be appeased if the party wants to achieve any of its national legislative agenda, then spending that benefits local constituencies is often going to be necessary to bring important congressmen on board to these bills. This is called pork barrel politics. Pork barrel spending is national tax money that is spent in local districts to benefit local interests. You might also see a lot of vote trading. This is informally called log rolling, where one congressman will agree to vote on one bill if another congressman votes on another bill. You vote for my bill, I'll vote for your bill, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. This kind of vote trading, which infuriates those who think that politics should be a matter of principle and a matter of the substance of the bills, is in part a consequence of this system, which creates a big wedge between the individual interests of congressmen and the interests of the parties to which they belong. Finally, you also tend to see spending on national bills being directed by law towards districts of influential congressmen. This is called earmarking. So you might still have spending that's nationally beneficial, right? Some kind of military spending bill, for instance, or road spending or road work, which really does have a national importance. But of course, then there's a question about, well, who will get the contract to fulfill these particular pieces of spending, and that might be very much one district over another. And so it doesn't have to be pork barrel politics. This is what we call earmarking. And of course, because committees are crucial to overcoming other collective dilemmas in Congress, particularly informational ones, some congressmen have a lot more influence than others when it comes to getting bills passed, so they can leverage that influence into spending for their districts. And by the way, district spending is always popular. If you're a congressman and you have a choice between advocating a bill which is going to bring money to your district and a bill which is going to fulfill the interests of your party at the national level, you're going to pick your district bill, because at most, you're going to get a small majority, well, not a small majority, depending on your district, it could be a large majority, but you're only going to get partisans interested in the bill that has national importance, whereas both Democrats and Republicans in a particular district can agree that spending that benefits their local district benefits them, and so they can get behind that sort of spending, whereas they will inevitably be split on the question of national spending and national issues more generally. The median voter theorem says that strategies employed by different parties will depend on the electoral system, and this is the third consequence. The consequence is that parties will be larger. Parties will be larger and more moderate. Parties will be larger and more moderate in a SMD FPTP system. So this is because in order to get elected, you need 50% of the seats, or just slightly, a shade more than 50%. I'm sorry. Yes, you need 15% of the seats, and you need to get 50% or more of the voters in each district, which means that if you want to win a district, you have to be fairly moderate, right? You have to be able to capture that soft middle of the political spectrum if you want to win. And in list PR systems, though, parties don't need to be moderate in order to matter. I mean, more moderate parties do tend to do a little bit better, but once those parties shift too much towards the center, that leaves opportunities for more extremist parties on the right and on the left, or single issue parties to lure voters away, again, because those voters can be persuaded to vote for sort of lesser parties, knowing that that vote might still have an important impact. And so in a two-party system, in a first-past-the-post single-member district system, if you can capture the median voter, you can probably capture all of the voters to one side of that voter, because they will definitely prefer you to the alternative, which is further away from them and sort of on the political spectrum. So this is the median voter theorem. The median voter theorem is that whoever wins the median voter, that is, say, the middle voter of all the voters, gets to win the election. And so parties will tend to compete to try to win the favor of the median voter, and if which has a number of consequences. One of the consequences is that the parties will be fairly moderate, and so they'll be large, and they will be fairly moderate, and they will tend to resemble one another. Right? These are all consequences of the median voter theorem, and the median voter theorem itself depends on a single-member district, first past the post, winner-take-all kind of electoral system. Another consequence, though, is Dovres Law, and this is a way in which the electoral rules affect how parties play the political game. So not only do they need to compete for the middle voter, not only do they need to moderate their views and sound like one another in order to win, but it's also the case that they need to form fairly large parties. And indeed, what will happen, and this is Maurice Duverger, a French political scientist, who first noticed this, is that what happens is that in these single-member district first past the post systems, you will tend to have two large parties, because parties that are not capable of winning the middle voter, the median voter, will tend to drop out and lose voters, and they will lose candidates as well. They won't just lose voters, but promising young candidates will not join them either, which will cause them to be even less politically credible and lose even more voters. And so you have this tendency of creating a stable two-party system in an SMD FPTP scenario. Parties that don't cater to a large number of voters just can't win districts. And if they can't win districts, then they're not politically relevant, then they're wasted votes. So a corollary, like I said, is that politicians who want to get elected don't join small parties. Even if they privately agree with non-mainstream views, that won't be the view that they put in front of the public. So to be successful, you have to join a large party and moderate your views. But again, Duverger's law states that in a single-member district, first-past-the-post system, you will tend to see two large parties form. And those large parties will tend to be fairly moderate and tend to aggregate a large number of competing and sometimes conflicting interests within them. Whereas those conflicting interests will tend to form separate political parties in other types of electoral systems where other rules aggregate votes. So in conclusions, we inherited our political institutions from the British. Many scholars and intellectuals today, though, would not pick single-member district first past the post. If they had to choose an electoral system from scratch, that wouldn't be the one that they would pick first. But among the public, there's really little popular appetite for electoral system reform. You tell people that you want to change the election rules, and people will get unhappy. People kind of like the system that they know and are familiar with. And political parties don't have any interest in changing the system either. They would receive little benefit from endorsing a political reform that would tend to weaken their vote share. Republican and Democratic parties would almost certainly shrink, and third parties would almost certainly appear or grow if the system were reformed to become more proportional. And so, although, again, a minority of intellectuals and academics think that the American-style system that we inherited from the British isn't optimal from any number of social goals, the chances of this changing appear to be actually quite small. The consequences of a single-member district, first-past-the-post system include weak political parties, party moderation, so moderate political parties, parochialism, which means an interest in local issues rather than national ones, a tendency to have lots of vote trading and strategic voting, both on the part of individual voters, but especially on the floor of the House and Senate. A lot of pork barrel spending, spending from the national government that benefits local districts, as well as individualism in Congress, right? This tendency for individual congressmen to vote in ways to benefit them over votes that might benefit their party, and so all of these features are features of an American political system that can be explained, at least in part, and in some cases in substantial part, by the electoral system.